Welcome, Aarti.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It's a beautiful day. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Aarti Parthasarthi, and I'm representing Chubb India Business Services. And I'm so happy, and I think I'm also nervous to be speaking at the Rising 2025. Okay, so what's today about? I think this is the second year Chubb is partnering with AIM. So AIM's this year's official research partner is Chubb. And just to give you a little bit of background behind what went down behind the scenes in the last few weeks, is that we released a survey to assess the landscape and the climate of diversity, equity, and inclusion in current times. And we're going to be presenting a report. We had an elaborate report with mixed responses, interesting responses as well. But for the sake of time, I think we're just going to go through the top 5 key findings of the report in elaboration, and then followed by taking some perspectives from Andrew as well. So we'll get started. Okay, I think we should just start off with this fun fact. Less fun, more factual. Well, did you all know that the skin color actually comes from a pigment called melanin that is found in the outermost layer of the epidermis? And this melanin layer is just 1 millimeter thick. Did we all know that? Interesting, isn't it? So underneath that tiny sliver of skin, we're all the same shade of pink. I think it's a very important message for us to keep this in mind, especially given the landscape and climate of today, of what we're facing in the arena of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So with that, so these are some of the interesting highlights that we thought we'll share with you all today. So some of the survey questions did ask for responses against advocating for diversity, equity, and inclusion. How does leadership commitment looking like in an inclusive workplace? What are we doing as far as workplace and technology accessibility for people with disabilities are concerned? What are we doing about the ecosystem for neurodiverse employees? And how are we handling bias and discrimination? That's, of course, our favorite debatable topic, isn't it? Before we go into the elaboration itself, we just wanted to put out there that these are merely findings from the survey responses that we had, and it's not an individual response or an individual opinion or opinion from both Chubb and AIM. Okay, let's go into the first one. It's a very interesting grid. The question here was really, how visible is our advocacy towards diversity, equity, and inclusion? So as you can see, the entire grid, it's not all consistent, and it's also not all inconsistent. It's a very mixed grid, right? So I think there's a lot of work for us to accomplish here. So how do we actually go from here to a place where we would like to be, right? I think the premise really lies in changing the current advocacy perspectives. When I say that, I think we all as individuals are responsible for educating ourselves in different cultures, in different identities, and not really imposing the burden of the education to marginalized groups. That's how we will be effectively able to consolidate our micro-communities, micro-cultures within the organization, and start building coalition, right? And again, come to think of it, it's more about contributing to a culture. Say, for instance, when you're hiring, you're always asking a question, what quality that this person has that they will come inside and change or enrich our culture, as opposed to just finding someone who would actually fit the mold, right? You want to move away from culture fit and move towards culture contribution, right? And again, in the grander scheme of things, it's all about diversity of thought, really. We know we're all diverse. We all come in different shapes and forms and dimensions. So what we really need to do here is intentionally, deliberately replace the word diversity with inclusion. We know we're all diverse. But what's important is we need to feel included, and we have the right to equity. Moving on to the next finding, the question here was about how strong is your leadership commitment in forming an inclusive workspace in your organization. This was one of the heartening responses we received as part of the entire report. As you can see, mostly people recognized that there is exceptional or strong leadership commitment to forming an inclusive workplace. Especially, I think, BFSI has done really well, followed by industrial and manufacturing and pharma. But we also have some more ground to cover. And I think, for me, it just boils down to 3 things to forming an inclusive leadership space, which is really about cognizance of bias. Now, think of it like this. If you look up to a leader, a senior leader in your organization, a person who really, you really look up to, who inspires you, and if he goes, you know what, I am prejudiced, but whatever, I am what I am. If that comes out of his or her mouth, fatal, isn't it? We don't want to hear that from a leader who actually we see, to be so inspiring, right? So we need to really understand the cognizance of bias there. And then when we understand that, I think what we need to do as the next step is to really challenge the status quo. Instead of you saying, I am what I am, accept me as I am, you could say, hey, you know what, you're right. I have this prejudice. Can we do something about it? Can we actually reset things? I think that's a better question to ask. So I think it just boils down to awareness of bias in ourselves and in the other. And when awareness is actually working in conjunction with humility and empathy, that's really the antidote to apathy. That's really the antidote to fatalism. The next one, I think this is one of the very important topics where I'm just going to take a pause and really drill down to the basics. So the question here was, how supportive is your workplace and technology accessibility for people with disabilities? I think the first thing that I wanted to mention to all of you out here is using a person-first language, right? When I say person-first language, you always say a person with autism, a person with visual impairment, people with disabilities. You're putting more emphasis on the person, on the people. Disability that they have comes secondary. Disability is just a part of life, right? We need to be able to embrace that. And just because just because I'm able to stand in front of you like this, upright, doesn't mean I'm superior. And surrogately, if you see, people with disabilities aren't superior as well, right? It is very normal for people with disabilities to lead a fulfilling, happy, successful life. And I think what we need to do as responsible individuals is actually embrace them within our communities. I think people with disabilities thrive when living in a normal environment rather than just confining them to institutions. And going to the ground reality, I think we really need to start talking about more than ramps, elevators, and accessible restrooms. We have to do more than that. Let's think about adaptive equipment. Say, for instance, user-friendly keyboards, mice, ergonomic tools, etc. We're talking about assistive technology, screen readers, screen magnifiers, eye-tracking devices. We're also talking about digital accessibility. In terms of having different color contrast in the backgrounds, having legible form, easier for people with disabilities to just scan and read, having captions, transcripts, audio descriptions, so on and so forth. So I think we have to really move away from just thinking of ramps, elevators, and accessible restrooms. They are normal. They're non-negotiable. They have to be there. We ought to do something more than that. Moving on to the next one. This is sort of also a cause that I'm really passionate about. But before we go there, I think the question here was, are we creating an ecosystem for our neurodivergent cohort? Again, this was very disheartening, especially in the pharma and the healthcare where you see varying grids, right? Well, the reason why I'm passionate about this cause is, I'm neurodivergent myself. I was very ashamed to admit it for a very long time, but I think now I've come to a point wherein, I gathered the courage of my convictions to tell you all that I was diagnosed with ADHD, I am a product of ADHD, and I'm no more ashamed of it. Think of neurodiversity as, like a metaphor, like, an irregularly shaped puzzle, right? But what happens when you start putting those pieces of the puzzles together? You end up actually solving, complex problems with innovative solutions. That's what happens. And I think we also need to treat this cohort a little differently than the norm. So, for instance, interviews. You can't really have the same interview approach to people with neurodiversity, mainly because you don't want to really make an anxious person more anxious, right? You need not have a panel. You could do a one-on-one interview and in a coffee shop in a less formal setting, right? But really the point is to have productive collaboration when you're hiring them, and then when you bring them in, you make a person centered environment and space where they can actually thrive and realize their full potential. So the last one, I think this is debatable, and at the same time, this is one of our favorite topics to debate. The question here was, how are your organizations handling bias and discrimination? I think the top part of the grid is sort of okay. That's probably one of the rare places where the men and women think alike, almost alike. But if you see the bottom part of the chart, the men are actually thinking inverse of what the women think. Men think that we are more proactive in handling bias and discrimination. I see a lot of smiles there. And reasonably effective in handling bias and discrimination, whereas the women think we're not really doing a good job in being proactive. We're just managing it somehow effectively. So I think this really boils down to the concept of allyship. By allyship, I just don't want to say it's the male allyship or it's the women supporting the men. It's about supporting each other. I think all genders need to recognize their privileges and really share the cognitive labor. And when children in our families actually see their parents sharing the cognitive labor, the sons are really encouraged to think, oh, okay, there will be a time in my life where I need to become the primary caregiver. It's not always the mother, it's the father as well. And the daughters are really encouraged to think, okay, I can build a career. I don't have to have a break in my career. I can go on and explore roles, even explore non-traditional roles that have been intergenerationally dominated by the male cohort. The last one is actually my favorite. It's called the 35-1 Pledge. I actually was listening to a shortcast of these authors who wrote a book called Good Guys, and they were actually called to an organization, and they were asked to do a DE&I initiative. So they came up with this idea called 35-1 Pledge, which is basically, we'll talk about the 35 plus, 30 minutes time, where a male colleague, we'll call this colleague Arun for the sake of this conversation, goes to a female colleague, we'll call this girl Aarti for the sake of the conversation. So Arun goes to Aarti every week. Arun takes the step. Arun sets up the meeting, goes to Aarti every week. He listens to her. No, he's not fixing her problems. He is just listening to her, really understanding her perspective, making a connection with her. And then once that time is spent, 30 minutes time is spent, he takes 5 minutes to really sit with Aarti and appreciate her for what she's done, for what she's achieved. And then, coming to the one, he goes to another room where Aarti is absent and basically talks behind her back, positively, of course, says good things about her even when she's not around. I think that's really a smaller commitment, but in the grander scheme of things, I'm pretty sure it's going to make a lot of difference. So that's 35-1 Pledge for you. So if you are sold into the idea, I would definitely request you to go ahead and encourage your male colleagues to take the pledge for you and make this a better place. I think that's really one of the ways to get to allyship. Talking about allyship, I'm going to invite on stage Andrew Bendel. He's one of my strongest allies so far. He's also one of the truest allies that we've got in the organization. So Andrew, please join us on stage. Okay. So I'm really excited to doing this with you.
Likewise.
And I think I'm a little more nervous now, I don't know why, but maybe a first place to start is by asking you, we did go through the results here of the DE&I report this year. and we presented some findings. But you went through the elaborate report. So what do you think was probably the most interesting finding to you, or what was most surprising to you when you went through the report?
Firstly, look, it's great to be here. I was here last year, I was in the audience facing this way, now I get to be up on the stage and I'm facing that way, which is a very different situation, but it's a pleasure and it's a privilege. It's a privilege to be speaking in front of a very dominant female audience. It doesn't happen very often, so thank you for that. Back to your question, Arti. So for me, there were two standout results of the survey. The first one was the increase in the proportion of females in the tech sector. It went from 40% last year to 45% this year. That is a very significant increase in the span of 12 months. That's a very strong result. And it, as we know, it's been traditionally a male-dominated sector. And what's even more exciting is, if you project that forward, whoever might be sitting here next year could be saying to the audience, guess what, we've hit parity in the tech sector, it could go to 50-50. And that is something that really would be worth celebrating, in my opinion. The second standout result for me was closer to home in the BFSI sector, which includes the insurance sector, of which I work. And the question was around leadership's commitment and visibility to DE&I. And that was a very strong result for BFSI. I think nearly 75% of respondents in the survey rated their leadership as strong or exceptional, and that's a terrific result. It's a very important result because if you don't have that commitment from leadership on anything, it's probably not going to get done. So to me, that was a strong result because it's an enabler to make positive change. Those were the two standout for me. I know there's certainly, across the rest of the survey, whilst there was, in general, some positive improvements, there's certainly other areas for improvement in some sectors, which we would all be aware of. But I think overall, it was definitely positive progress from last year to this year in the survey.
It's good, isn't it?
That's good. Okay, I'm going to cut over to Arti and ask her some questions. And the first question is, who is a woman leader that's influenced you in your career? Or there may be multiple.
Oh, of course, yes. I mean, I always say this to my mentors and sponsors, especially my women mentors and sponsors, that I always carry a piece of them with me. And I have all of those imprints on me as we're talking now. And I think my mother is a great example. I learned a lot from her. I think primitive early development was from her. But I think since we're talking about career and in this situation, I think I would definitely call out this exemplary woman. Her name is Patricia Haley Glass. She's someone who's really, really been the backbone of my growth spurt in my career. I think I was doing really odd roles, middle management, tactical stuff, and I think her association as a program manager really changed the game for me. She's extremely resilient. She was like, she wanted what she wanted. So it was very, very hard working with her in the beginning, but I think she also went up to be, I still call her if I have questions in dealing difficult situations and solicit advice from her. But I think really for me, Patricia means resilience. Patricia means a lot of strength and a lot of confidence in what I've achieved today. So, yeah.
That's a really interesting nomination. Patricia has also had quite a significant influence on my own career as a manager. I've worked with her for quite a while, some time ago now. She is an amazing lady, and it's interesting that you've listed her as someone has materially impacted your career, but I would say the same. So that's an interesting nomination.
That's really nice.
Next question for you, Artie.
How many questions are you?
15. No, it's not 15 questions. I think there's 4. What do you like about your job?
Oh, am I allowed to say everything? but no, I mean, clearly I think the opportunity to work with key decision makers like yourself, like Sean and the others in the organization, and I think the last decade or so I've had the consistent opportunity to work with high-profile leaders, demanding leaders. I think that's also contributed to a lot of growth in my career. That's one. Autonomy is something that I really enjoy at Chubb. Just give me a project. Nobody's behind my back. I'm allowed to do what I want to do. I can put in, I can experiment with it. I can put in different ideas to it. I can collaborate with whoever I want. I think that's a great thing. So I would definitely call out, the opportunity to work with great leaders and really autonomy to do your own thing that's 2 important things that I really enjoy about my job.
Great. Yeah, similar. So how did you get into the insurance or BFSI, insurance/tech industry? I know you've worked in both sectors in your career. What got you into that space, Artie?
Well, I think, Andrew, I just went with the flow. It was pretty unconscious. I did not think too much into it. But I think curiosity, when I think we were working with RRD and then we were working for Chubb, actuarial is something that I was exposed to quite early on when I worked on some of the life actuarial projects. So it's like, what is that? I want to know that. And the more I got to know about it, I got to know that it's a very niche, sector within the insurance space. So I really liked, how it is, more to do with mathematics, statistics, and things. But then I'm raising a 14-year-old, and in my head, I want him to be an actuary. I don't know if he's going to live up to the expectations that I have, but I think I at least want him to become an actuary. So it's really fascination to some of the things that I was not introduced to before, and was really the culmination of my functional expertise into the insurance domain. I never knew that there was so much scope for program management and project management, especially in the insurance space, and I was like, proved 100% wrong. It's more about portfolio governance, it's more about program management, as importantly as it is about building our products and building our capabilities.
Great. As an actuary myself, I would like to extend an invitation to your son to come and have a chat to me. He wants
of course.
to learn a bit more about the career. So last question for you, Artie, is any advice you can give for women in technology?
I think what I've learned over the years is to just be authentically myself. Like not really look up to one specific person, one specific leader, and then, extract, put in all of your energies there. It's really about observing with an open mind different situations, different ideas, different people, and basically learning from those imprints and then putting it all together. So I think authenticity is really a key part to who we are, both within the career space and of course outside as a person as well. And I think that authenticity has given me a lot of confidence in what I do. I don't doubt myself like how I used to doubt myself in the beginning. So I think I have less of an imposter syndrome these days and mostly confident. And I think you should just speak your mind, but just don't speak your mind just like that. But speak it humbly and put it politely, but put across your opinions. Don't shy away from having an opinion and also putting across an opinion.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Thank you. Now, I think you have to stop asking me questions. I have to ask you another question, maybe one last question, given the interest of time.
Sure.
What would be your advice, that you get? What is the one thing that you learned from your career that you would give as an advice for others to learn from?
Yeah, that could be a very long answer to that question. So I've been fortunate. I've had 22 years with the company Chubb, and I've only had 2 managers in that span of time. That's pretty unusual. I don't know if anybody in the audience can beat that. Maybe no hands down there. And both managers are exceptional leaders, exceptional. So, but there is a common denominator in that information I've just given you. Can anybody, I'll hand that over to the audience, can anybody figure out what the common denominator is? Too mathematical a question, sorry about that. I'm an actuary. Tenure is the common denominator. So I've been 22 years, I've only had 2 managers. Obviously those managers have been, or those leaders have been in the company for a long time as well. And in fact, my current manager's been in the company not far off 30 years. And so I think tenure is an important aspect. You get to know the people of the organisation, the fabric of the organisation over time, and your manager gets to know more about you, of course, over time, and that helps you to get into an area that's most appropriate for you in your career because of that time spent. And I've been fortunate enough, I've only had a couple of different roles, but they've been ones that have really suited me, and that's why I've stayed with the company for this amount of time. So I think tenure is very important. If you're moving around every couple of years, you can't get that sort of insight or build those connections with people in the company, and therefore you're sort of floating around trying to progress your career. But it's for me, it's not the right way of building a career in a company. So that's one. Another one that I felt was very important was opportunity. So you want to be looking for opportunities, and if an opportunity comes your way, my advice is to take it. Sometimes it can be hard to move away from your current role. And for me, I had an opportunity to move to Singapore for a few years with my family. My 2 young boys were going to school, and that was a big change, taking your family away from, we were living in Australia, to Singapore, very different place, but we just had a fantastic time there, learnt many different things, not just about the work environment and my senior colleagues at work. And Singapore was the regional office, is the regional office for Chubb's Asia Pacific region. So you're there with a lot more senior people, which was great from a career perspective, but also from an understanding, getting a better understanding of the rest of the world. It's a great spot to be travelling to Asia compared to where I am in Australia, where we're a long way from everywhere. So yeah, opportunity, look for them. If something comes your way, take it. It's rare that you would look back and say, I shouldn't have taken that opportunity. It's more common for people to go, gee, I wish I took that opportunity that I had X years ago. So that's my advice. And the other one is to, obviously, as Nidhi mentioned in the opening presentation, which was great, thank you. The world is changing at a very rapid pace, at an increasing rate. The rate is increasing. There's no doubt about that. So the ability to adapt and learn, continuous learning, is a necessity these days to get ahead. That bell's annoying me, so I better stop. I better stop talking. That's the advice I give.
Yeah, but what a way to end this session with some very important points. Invest time in tenure, grab opportunities as they come. So we really hope you picked up something that you didn't know, you learned something new, and we hope you make the best of what you learned today. So thank you everyone for the opportunity.
Thank you
It was
very much.
great to be
Thank
here.
you.